Hi everyone, welcome to the first programmatic series session at SCMP. I'm Timmy Bankole, the Associate Director of Digital Operations, and today we'll be going through the best practices for programmatic advertising during unusual times. Before we go into the presentations, please note that we are recording today's session and we will be sending over this to all the attendees. There is also the Q&A box at the, below, so please feel free to type in your questions and we will be answering them at the end of today's slide. So for programmatic advertising, we've put together a few slides to cover what I believe and we believe are the best practices that should be taken to drive effective ROIs in times like this. The first one, we've considered mobile to be a key part of the programmatic industry. So if you think of 50% of all traffic worldwide actually happens on the mobile phone, especially in Hong Kong, we see at least 92% of the people actually accessing the internet via their smartphones. A good interesting stat to actually notice is while people are on their phones, 90% of those participation actually happens within an app. So what that means for the programmatic industry is you actually have a lot of data and a lot of scale to actually reach people. When we're planning, we need to understand that our audiences are engaging with these devices, which provides us with massive data opportunities. So we can look into who the device ID is, which makes us understand a lot more about the user. And compared to the cookie, a device ID is a lot stronger because most people actually do not delete those advertising IDs. And that is a persistent, in a way, ID that we can use to target people at later dates wherever they are on those devices. And also, I think one of the things to also consider is you get things like location data, which can also be used to understand where people are in terms of movement, because again, in this day and age, most people take their devices, or I'd say majority of the people take their devices with them wherever they go. So from a programmatic standpoint, you have the reach to get to that many people. You also have rich data signals, and you also get to make the best out of the environments, being in an in-app environment. What this also means is making sure you have a strong attribution strategy, making sure your campaigns are tailored to the device that you're targeting. So what that means is, from a mobile perspective, ensuring your creatives are mobile first and making sure they also fit into the device that you're going to serve. So making sure everything we're doing, so video, making sure they're consumable content and not long form. Because if you look at how people consume content to mobile, it's more of a snacking environment compared to the larger screens where you're on there and you can actually scroll through and consume a lot more content. So we do advise the mobile strategy is pretty much a good thing to take into consideration, and making sure your creative and your decisioning is using the data and effectiveness of the platform that you have in hand. Also taking into consideration attribution. So looking into your mobile device and the different touch points, again, being the app and in web, understanding how those two communicate with each other. In the web environment, you've got your cookies. In the app environment, you've got your device IDs. Understanding the synergy between both and working with partners who could help you with that attribution to make sure you are actually getting the best return of investment is something we do advise our programmatic partners to look into. The next key thing is being in a trusted environment. With the things going on nowadays, we've seen a drop in demand, and I think globally everyone has experienced that. And as a trend, usually you'd see traders at this point lowering the eCPMs or the CPM prices. What that means is, in certain cases, you'd have your ads appearing in what we call cheap environments. This is, again, from a brand safety perspective, not ideal for any brand. The idea is you want to reach your quality users in the best of possible environments, provided there is. So again, on our side, we kind of advise our partners to ensure we work directly with the publishers we're talking to, And directly means having that one-to-one relationship where you kind of you get to understand what side your ad is going to be on. In most cases, you can also get to know what position or what page your ad may be on. So when you buy programmatically, you've got ways of buying programmatically with also the understanding of where you're going to be. So you look into the programmatic guaranteed or your programmatic direct, which is a curated space for you to show your ads across a publisher's page. A lot better than pretty much a hit and miss or hope to appear on a site that without actually being sure where you're going to be. If you go down the cheap inventory route, then you end up appearing against what we call UGC, which stands for user-generated content. In places like that, you actually do not know what may appear or what may not appear. The other thing we also advise people to consider is what we call our trusted sellers or trusted buyers. And this is the incentive brought to you by the industry, where we look into things like ad.text or apps.app.text. And what this means is making sure whoever sells your inventory is actually being authorized to sell that inventory. So for example, if I'm going to take ourselves as an example, we work with only selected few partners, and only those partners have the right to sell our inventory to elsewhere. So making sure as a programmatic partner, your DSP is actually receiving inventory from the right people, making sure the domains you're actually appearing on and actually what they're meant to be and not being spoofed, where you end up buying, say, SCMP.com, but in reality, you're buying that from a partner who doesn't have access to SCMP.com. So making sure your DSP listens out for trusted sellers is also a key thing that we advise our partners. One of the other key points we do mention is the investment in ad tech. And this, from a brand safety perspective, means investing in partners that are there and have been there for time, either third party or first party, to ensure you're appearing in the right environment. So some of those partners, as we may all know, will be the likes of Integral Science, Comscore. For us, so that's Project Signal. But the whole idea for this is to make sure whatever advertisement we do appears in the environments that we trust and appears in the environments that we are proud to associate with our brand. And then we move on to the next topic for us, which is really key. As an industry, brand safety has been something that we've talked about for a long time. And brand safety previously started out with being a holistic approach where we use the likes of, say, URLs, we use a whitelist or a blacklist, and we use that to pretty much catch out any content that we deem harmful to our brands. With what's happened recently with COVID, we've quickly come to realize it is a time to move beyond brand safety effectively. And what this means is, how do we take an approach that differs for the different brands? So here at SCMP, what we've done is look into what we call brand suitability, which means what may be suitable for one brand is not exactly a replica for the same brand. But the idea is every brand gets a different approach. So we take into consideration the sentiment, which means, what does that context actually mean? Do we look at that context in a negative way or in a positive way? So when you're going for your programmatic buys, understanding the environment that your ad is going to be in, and understanding that not all keywords actually say or actually convey the message within that article. So on the example you have on the screen, you'd see the word shot being highlighted in red in this article. But what you'd notice is the article has nothing to do with death, but more of everything to do with photography. So when we look at this from that angle, you'd know this is an environment that you want certain brands to appear against, because this actually conveys the message from a brand safety perspective, and also aligns to a category that would work well with the likes of, say, your cameras or brands who fall along those lines. So making sure your brand safety list or your whitelist and blacklist don't have that approach, which will enable you to lose out on quality users and also miss out of the right environments that you should be in. So the key takeaway here from a programmatic standpoint is understanding who you want to reach out to, why you want to reach out to them, and mostly understanding where you want to avoid. So in most cases, with what is going on with COVID, most brands or all brands would want to avoid anything horrific around COVID. That should not stop brands from appearing against content that is actually on the positive spin. Positive spin being the cases reducing, Hong Kong reopening, or other countries reopening the borders. You look into stories like that, and the whole context and article around that is more positive compared to, say, January, where the articles were more talking about the breakouts in the different regions. So being able to understand what the end goal is and what you want to achieve for the brand is also very important when you're looking into suitability and how we can make that work for our different brands and different partners we work with. Another key thing in this time that we want to focus on when you're buying programmatically is looking beyond the click. In times like this, especially, every dollar counts. It's pretty much making sure you're getting the best buy and pretty much driving the most efficient ROI. And what this mostly means is you get a lot of buyers who can focus on just the click. In reality, that actually doesn't really help. We, as an industry, we've had instances with ad fraud, which is pretty much click farms, where people sit in an office and just click and click and click, and in reality, you actually get no return from that. So what we advise programmatic traders and marketeers is to be able to understand what the actual KPI you want to achieve is, understanding what your product is, understanding the user journey that's needed, and understand the consideration period that may be needed for that product. So for example, buying a car will be very different from actually someone going to McDonald's. You actually need a longer consideration period for things like that to happen. And you also need to look into things like what happens offline in terms of, do people actually go for a test drive? How long does that take? Have they downloaded a brochure? And being able to look into all those different metrics and combine all of them to create an attribution model that favors everyone. If you go on just focusing on the click, then you're pretty much suggesting everyone clicks and then goes ahead to buy a car, which in reality, we all know that's not how it works. So our advice to marketeers and programmatic traders and pretty much the programmatic industry is setting the realistic KPIs that we understand works very differently for the different products that each one takes up to markets. Also looking into things like engagement metrics. So when we talk about CTR is a metric that, like I mentioned earlier, has been around for ages. And one of the things as an industry, we also start focusing on is fields that we look at things like a view through conversions. But view through conversions are also things that can be at the bottom of the page, which means no one actually saw this ads, but they actually count to your view through conversions. So looking at engagement metrics like viewability, how much of my ads were actually in view before they were counted as a view through conversion, how much engagement or how much time on page that my ads actually get. And you can get all this metrics from working with trusted partners and from ensuring from the get-go you have an understanding of the different platforms that provide you with this information, the different devices that can get you this information. So making sure your strategy is pretty much set up in that manner gives you a strong incline or a strong indication of a pathway to success. So again, beyond the click, we all know that high impact formats is also something that does perform really well when you look at engagement. So making sure whatever product you have a tailored strategy that pretty much fits into that goal. And most importantly, again, the programmatic buying allows for multiple and different buying points. So you'd either have 3 or 4 or 5 different partners that you're buying from, and in terms of publishers, maybe running across 20 different publishers. one of the things to always make sure we do from the start is to ensure that your attribution model covers the different touch points you're working with. So as I said earlier, if you're buying an app inventory versus web versus desktop, the whole idea is to ensure there is some synergy between those 4 different or 3 different platforms, and you can connect those dots from in a data-led way. And that takes us to, I think, the final slide, which we go into personalization. For this one, again, most programmatic arms have, I'd say, left this to last, where the creative approach has been, in most cases, forgotten. What we see is creative actually plays a massive part in performance. The creative messaging, the A/B testings, and pretty much understanding and taking a data-led approach when it comes to personalization is a key thing and a key aspect for the industry. One of the things we notice is you see at least 4 times higher performance once you have a tailored approach towards your creatives. So understanding from a brand's perspective who you want to reach out to, who my audience is, and if they've engaged previously, how do I get them to re-engage? So I'd give you an example. So if you look at a user journey of buying a car, so you start off with a user seen an ad on a page, he's clicked on it, gone onto the website, but actually not bought the car. Within that period, the user may have actually gone to different other sites and different other pages to actually consume and do some research on what type of car they want. Serving them the same ad they saw that took them to your sites may not be the most effective way to get them to consume that content. But understanding the fact that they'd been to your site and looked at a few cars and actually not bought any means you can actually use all that data to go to retarget them in a way where you show them only the cars they've actually looked at, only the cars that fall into the price range they looked at, or also try to understand why they did not add any car to their basket or add any item to the basket at that point in time. That way, the user kind of understands the journey and the user feels a lot more special, or I'll say unique, because the message he's getting is definitely going to be different from someone else who has not made any research or someone else who hasn't been to the site. So we notice once users get that differential treatment, or what would say the unique targeting, users are more likely to engage with that ad because there's more of a personal touch to the ad. So one of the things we do advise our programmatic teams is to make sure the line between the operations, the data, and the creative is less blurry. And what that means is conversations between the planning team to understand what the product is, conversations also with the team who are building the creative to make sure the right messaging is going out. And again, back to what we said previously with the platforms, understanding what platforms you're using, which means what different data points am I collecting from those platforms that I can use to inform my creative. So on a mobile device, I can understand when someone is closer to my outlet, which means I can hit them with a creative messaging that brings them a lot closer to either get a test drive or actually drive a higher footfall. Whereas on a desktop device, based on what they're reading, based on the contextual environment, I can find that if they're interested in, say, a certain type of product or a certain color of a vehicle based on what they're actually searching. So making sure we can understand those different touch points and those different environments actually makes our creative hold a lot more weight. And when it comes to targeting, actually takes a lot of pressure off the operations team, because the creative already does 10% or 50% of the work because of a data-led approach that's been integrated into it. The last thing, which was pretty much briefly talked upon, is the dynamic ads and UX. So again, based on personalizations, taking it a bit further to understand what is the landing page going to look like for this consumer. You get a lot of brilliant ads that take it to a landing page, which has even not been built for the device you're viewing it on. So an example being consuming an ad on a desktop, and taking you to a landing page that has only got snackable content. What that means is the user pretty much is kept on that page for a short period of time, and then you may notice a high bounce rate as an advertiser on your site. Or vice versa, going to a mobile page with a lot of content and then leading to a high bounce rate on your site. So making sure we can tailor our landing pages, if possible, to the user, that'd be great, where every user gets a different view, because again, a tailored view for the user means we actually understand every touch point or every search and every interaction they've had on our sites. And that actually means we value them to give them just different scenarios. And when we look into creating different landings, is pretty much making sure as a brand, we're keeping our users on our page. So for us at SCMP, one of the key things we take into consideration before we do most things is the user experience, making sure we can keep those users as long as we can on that page. And I think from a brand's perspective, that is also an approach brands should start taking, and enforcing that with the creativity and the targeting. We pretty much ensure everything we do all works together. And then lastly, I know this is something that we mentioned previously, just before we round off, the key focuses in these times is making sure we can effectively drive ROI. And for us, that's pretty much, in summary, making sure we can nail down the mobile first strategy, ensuring we're using the device to the best capabilities, making sure we're in the trusted environment, encouraging ourselves with that one-to-one relationship, knowing where our inventory is coming from, working with trusted partners, and having those conversations into who do you work with from a brand safety point of view? How do you tackle brand safety? What is your approach to ad fraud? Those are conversations that we should not be shy to have with our partners, because it is our money, and the best thing we need to do is understand that approach. So have those conversations with your partners, understand the brand safety or the brand suitability approach of the partner, ensuring you know where your ad is going to be, ads.txt and apps.txt, and again, ensuring your tech platform understands and read those files, knowing where the inventory comes from, know who has the right to sell that inventory, looking into the geos you're targeting, making sure they work for the brand, and then you move into brand suitability, understanding what the end goal for the brand is. Where don't I want to be versus where do I actually want to be? So, for example, an alcohol brand would never want to be in the sections or target to the same audiences as some, say, kindergarten/educational brands. Those are still two premium audiences, but very different based on who the brand is. So being able to understand your product and the different people you should be reaching, and being able to create that approach in your strategy plays a massive part. And then onto the engagement side, understanding the different metrics that actually do help in performance. So not just focusing on the click, not just focusing on pretty much that side of things, but creating an engagement plan that takes all of those into consideration, with also the consideration period your brand or product needs to have. So taking that consideration period and understanding your conversion may need a 72-day window versus a 7-day window goes a long way into reducing ad fraud, and also understanding performance, which in return leads to you more having a better ROI and a data-led approach for your next campaigns. And then we end up with personalization, which, as we previously just covered, is making sure your approach is unique for the different individuals you're targeting, and making sure you're collecting the most informative data points and building that within your team. And most importantly, reducing that gap between the operations, the data, and the creative teams to make sure that communication is steady to get the best return on investment. So yeah, That is it in terms of best practices. I know it was quite short, so please feel free to ask your questions. I do believe we have some. Oh, Jesus. Right. So the first question is, what's the best mobile ad? Again, a good question, but then we need to also understand what we're trying to achieve. So if we're looking at a best mobile ad for viewability, then I'll suggest an ad that's got a high impact. So an ad that pretty much is either on the screen for a long period of time, or an ad that pretty much occupies the whole screen also helps when you look into things like viewability. But most importantly, also understanding who is the tech vendor you need to use to measure that ad for when it comes to performance, when it comes to things like performance. Then you want your for performance, you're looking at the smaller ads in terms of smaller banners, mostly from an ROI perspective, and because you can actually reach a lot more people because you would have a lot more impressions to target. So your high impact banners help you drive things like your clicks and your viewability. But when it comes to more performance, then you look into a good mixture and a blend. Making sure that approach is tailored for the different brands and the different and the different KPIs you want. The next question says, should we do direct programmatic or better through an agency? Again, this depends on the manpower and the understanding of both partners. From our side, a direct programmatic strategy is definitely preferred. One, because we have the expertise in house, and we have the understanding of our sites the best. But then again, going through an agency means you may need to reach different touch points. So, for example, you may want to do things like, say, WeChat. You may want to do a lot of different advertising across different publishers. Then an agency will be needed, as opposed to just going directly to a publisher, which means obviously you're only on that publisher's entity, and everything you do in terms of the different touch points remain around those publishers' environment. So again, it strongly depends on what you're trying to achieve and who your target audience is for that brand. The third question is, as I understand, programmatic campaign varies depending on each brand's affordability. I want to know if there's a minimum budget to consider in order to achieve a reasonable maximum result, and which campaign asset is more ideal for programmatic between static images or video formats. Okay, so I think this is a really good question, because the programmatic has always been seen as a cheap environment, which 100% it isn't. Programmatic should be seen as a very effective way to reach a lot more people at scale. So when it comes to campaign budgets, again, we take that back to understanding what we're trying to achieve. When you look into a new product, the most important thing is brand awareness. So we want to reach as many people as possible to ensure they understand our brand and to get that awareness up. Flip that to the other side. Once we have the brand awareness, we still want to use programmatic to understand how many people can we actually convert to engage with our products. So in terms of minimum and maximum budget, that 100% now depends on what we're trying to achieve. If you're going from a branding approach, then you want to spend a bit more to make sure everyone understands and gets to see your ad. And when it comes to performance-led, then you need to pretty much have an ROI strategy where you want to understand how much am I going to spend and what is my return going to be. So answering those questions will give you a good gauge of where your minimum and maximum should be. In terms of the second part of the question, in terms of static versus video formats, again, your video format helps you create that awareness, helps you get a quick message out there that you can pretty much create a 5, 10, 15-second video and convey a lot of message, convey a lot of points from a brand awareness point of view. From your performance, then your static image with the right message, with your call to action, drives an actual key thing in terms of performance. Buy now, click here. You get those messaging, you get those messages across in a more direct manner. So again, both really useful methodologies, but both also can be applied. Both can be applied to your targeting. I heard that Apple may get rid of IDFA. Do you think they will? Right. So this is something that, as an industry, we've seen with the demise of cookies. So we've seen cookies pretty much in the next 2 years are going to be made redundant. And as a whole industry, we're tackling this in different methods, making sure we can create persistent data and taking first-party data into consideration. For the likes of IDFAs, there has been what I'd say conversations, not as loud as the cookie conversation, but there's been conversations around if they will ever go. I do believe at some points they will, but I do see a longer life. I do think would have a longer lifespan than we before that happens. But that being said, the most important point is actually understanding who your users are, creating that first-party data connection between your brand and that user, making sure you have that persistent link. Therefore, you actually are not really worried about the IDFA or the cookie because you actually understand your users at a more granular level and can connect to them on every different touch point. Sorry, there are a lot of questions. I'm just going to run through. Retargeting ads. How many past days data should we set? So again, for retargeting, this depends on your product. So when you look at retargeting, you want to understand how deep into that funnel is that user. Are you retargeting everyone who's hit your landing page? Are you retargeting everyone who's filled 5 out of the 7 forms and then they've dropped off? You also need to understand why have they dropped off and what was that turning point. So for example, when looking to the finance industry, you go through setting credit checks. After setting credit checks, people drop off, and they may drop off because they may not meet the criteria. So your retargeting based on those people should be very different to the people you're retargeting who have just visited the homepage because you want to bring those people back. But the people who've dropped off based on the credit check, you kind of need to understand if it's because they don't meet the criteria in terms of don't have enough funds or just not the right audiences, and then you retarget those less and those who've just visited the page. The next question says, viewability, do SCMP guarantee this? Another question in terms of for SCMP, we always hit and always perform higher than the industry average. So do we guarantee to outperform the industry average? Yes, because that's something we do. And that is something that on all the campaigns we run, we do outperform in terms of performance performance, viewability, or performance being viewability or CTR, we definitely do outperform the industry average, and that's something we are very proud of within the team. Does Programmatic Guaranteed work better than PMPs? Right. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. Programmatic Guaranteed ensures you're within the right environment of a trusted publisher, getting the right access to the data you need with pretty much a guarantee. With PMP, it means you're within an auction, so you pretty much bidding against others. And in some cases, you may not win the environment you want to be in. Some PMPs also have less data, and some PMPs also do not include all the publishers' inventory. So again, Programmatic Guarantee, I wouldn't say necessarily works better, but you get a lot more out of Programmatic Guaranteed than you will get through a PMP. How do you reduce ad fraud when buying programmatically? So again, this is a really good question, and this is pretty much what we try to answer. Reducing ad fraud can be done in a few ways. One is pretty much working directly with those partners, ensuring whoever the publisher you're buying across with is someone that you've taken the time to speak to directly. I know from most traders, you either have a whitelist understanding who makes it to that whitelist and why they make it to that whitelist. So again, a whitelist can be from say 10 to 1,000, but understanding who those publishers are, why they're there, are they there for a certain vertical, understand how do they source their traffic, how much of the content is actually UGC and how much of the content has actually been created by as in trusted editors, and also having tech platforms that help you catch these things out. So like I mentioned, your IIS, your ComScore, your MOITs, understanding the level of either fraudulent traffic or whatever it is that needs to be applied. So making sure you're working with those vendors to actually check that. Again, from an SCMP standpoint, we've got a product signal that's rolled out across pretty much all of our inventory. So buyers pretty much have nothing to worry about on that front. And then when you look at who we are in terms of a news brand, we've also got trusted editors who are producing content. So making sure that approach is taken on other partners and understanding who they are and how they fit into to the publisher landscape. Can you do branding programmatically? Yes, so the question pretty much says, can you do branding programmatically and can you buy larger ads? What about sponsorship? So the good news is yes, across SCMP you can. And again, for that approach, you need to use the Programmatic Guaranteed product. And through the Programmatic Guaranteed product, you pretty much have access to all of our inventory and yeah, our larger ads and our sponsorship ads. Everything can be sold or everything is available through Programmatic Guaranteed for the brands. So please feel free to reach out. Can you apply data to a PMP or PG deal? Again, the answer is yes. On your brand end, you can apply data to a PMP. And on a Programmatic Guaranteed, the answer should be no, because your guaranteed means every data set has been applied by the publisher. So you applying any restrictions on your end will pretty much contradict that part of the guaranteed deal. And similarly to the PMP, the idea for going into that conversation is to agree with the publisher what you want to target, and that publisher creates that space for you to be there. So again, overlaying the targeting on your end only restricts the volume to which you should ideally receive. But that's why you should go for the one-to-one conversations first to understand what you want to achieve and work directly with that publisher to ensure you don't need to layer that much targeting on your end because the publisher is taking care of that. Can we apply creative dynamic optimizations to PMP deals on SCMP? Again, yes. So in terms of creative dynamic optimization, they can be applied on the buyer's end to PMP deals. The most important thing to consider is whose data sets are being used. For SCMP, as we mentioned earlier, we use just the SCMP first-party data. So for creative dynamic optimization, that can be done using the first-party data, making those decisions for the creative. Which from a brand's point, if you're using your first-party data, your first or third-party data, that would also work. But when you're going through a programmatic deal, that would also restrict the volume because the data sets would be different, SCMP being our first-party data, and the brand maybe, or the partner being a third-party data set. I think the last two questions, is there a minimum CTR benchmark for a brand to set as a KPI from each campaign to consider it successful? So this is a really good question. As an industry, we've always had CTR benchmarks, and one of the things people kind of need to understand is that benchmark differs per the device, per the different creative, per the brand, and per the creative messaging. So as a rough average, yes, we can look into a benchmark. So for example, you look into your standard display. If you standard display based on Google stats, you've got on desktop around a 0.06 engagement as a benchmark. But that does not mean when you run, say, depending on your combination of strategy, when you run some high impact formats like SCMP, we see performances as high as a 0.1 and 0.2. It depends on the combination of your buy and in terms of the different devices, the different formats, and how strong your creative messaging is, and all those things need to be taken into consideration. So again, I would advise the the approach should be more of what do we want to achieve, and creating a benchmark that way, understanding how much budget you have. But if we do understand the device, say mobile in general, because more people consume short form content, so the right messaging and the right creative should lead to a higher performance than the desktop. So looking into it that way in terms of the devices and the formats will be the best approach to go. As mentioned, different brands have different brand safety concerns. Towards the same article, how is SCMP's AI technology signify the differences for different brands? How do you take them to learn? How does this work? Right. So this is pretty much a question on Signal. So as we mentioned earlier, Project Signal is what I'd call SCMP's brand suitability, evolving brand safety to the future. And it's something that we rolled out early this year. And the idea is to make sure every brand is treated differently. And the way we do that, again, is 100% working closely with that brand to understand what they're trying to stay away from, what are we trying to avoid, what we're trying to achieve, and who is the actual audience we're trying to hit. So you have your generic IB categories in terms of adult violence, things you 100% need to be away from, and those are not questionable. But you also have have things like environments where that may be favorable to a certain brand based on who they are. So, for example, if I was to look into insurance, for example, insurance may want to be around articles that talk about an accident because that's something they cover, whereas, say, your flight brands may not want to be around anything that has to do with a crash. So being able to understand who those different partners are and what they're trying to achieve and how does it help their business is the approach we take to understand how to do that. So in terms of our AI pretty much learns after we have that conversation. So we pretty much have the conversations directly with the brands and work with them to understand what we're trying to achieve and feed all that back into our tech for that particular campaign. And like I said, every brand or every campaign has a different methodology. That's the whole concept of brand suitability, which pretty much evolves from a blanket approach in terms of brand safety. I believe that's the final question. Thank you very much. And as we mentioned, we will be sharing over the sessions, which include the deck at some time later. Thank you very much. Cheers.